Hi, everybody. Thanks, everyone who's just coming in. We'll get started in just a few moments. And if you're just joining, you can share in the chat where you are Zooming in from today, and maybe if you'd like what you had for Hanukkah dinner for the first night last night. So we have some, Michigan with latkes, chicken enchiladas and jelly donuts in Des Moines, Iowa. Some questionable choices in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn. Leftovers with latkes. Some more chicken schnitzel, nice. I had fried chicken from a local fried chicken purveyor. I live in a place where it is harder to find latkes, but easy to find fried chicken, spinach latkes. Yeah, I'm with you, Jeff. I agree. Schnitzel should be a Hanukkah standard because it has the protein plus the fried. Great. We'll give everybody just a couple more minutes. Mark with the brisket. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeffrey. Great. We'll give everybody just another minute. I know we have a lot of folks coming in, and then we'll get started. Great. I am going to welcome everybody this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're Zooming in from. My name is Rebecca Missel, and I am the Partnerships Director at Haggadot.com, and I am delighted to welcome everybody here today to our Hanukkah Cooking Hotline with Liz Alpern and Jeffrey Yoskowitz of the Gefilteria. I've been a fan of the Gefilteria and friends with Liz and Jeffrey for some time, and I was so delighted to bring together my food loving side and my professional work. It's nice to see things sort of coincide and coalesce. Just a few words before we get started with the cooking questions. Just here today about Haggadot.com and our work. So Haggadot.com is a website, but also a platform where we invite every Jewish person or people who identify as Jewish, regardless of their background, to find a place for themselves in the Passover story so that they can create more meaningful, more personal, and more connective seders. If you haven't been on our site before, this is a little preview of what it looks like, and we give you the power to design a Passover Seder or a Shabbat dinner or a Hanukkah celebration that really reflects you and your loves and values and aesthetics. And you can mix and match all these different clips on our site. This is our Hanukkah page on customandcraft.org/Hanukkah. So you can pop over there. We'll share it along with the recording to this session. And in there we have a Hanukkah cookbook, which actually features a couple of recipes from the Gefilteria that are not for latkes. So get excited about some non-latke recipes in there. We like to diversify and vary our cooking options. And we have a Hanukkah coloring book on the site and some other materials from the other two folks who shared, who led webinars for us this week. So one with a DIY outdoor menorah making kit from artist Hillel Smith, and a group of year-ending reflection questions from Kohenet Kashira Halev Fife, which we are just so delighted to have. So Haggadot.com and our new site, HighHolidaysathome.com, are both projects of custom and craft Jewish rituals. And we are just passionate about taking these ancient traditions and mixing them and recrafting them with modern technologies and new formats. And we are a 501c3, and we really rely on users like you and folks who come to our programming like you to help support our work. So if you are able as part of your Hanukkah or year-end giving to make a donation, and I'll put the link to that again in the chat later. And with that, I am going to introduce our speakers and our wonderful guests for today. And I'm going to see if I can spotlight two people at once. I did it. Great. So Liz Alpern and Jeffrey Yoskowitz are the founders and visionaries behind the Gefilteria, which is I would say also a platform, but it's a cookbook. It's an organization that does recipe demos. That's really all about, I think, like the work at Custom and Craft, reimagining these ancient or semi-ancient recipes from our Ashkenazi cooking traditions and bringing them into our modern lives, and how can we sort of reimagine and remix those recipes for our modern tastes and sensibilities, but also with a lot of deep love and reverence for those food traditions. And living in the before times, not too far away from both Liz and Jeffrey, I've had a chance to get to know both of them in our non-cooking lives, and I will miss not having Liz's latkes this year, but I am so excited to be here with both of them this afternoon. And throughout this session, everybody, some folks submitted questions in advance, and we appreciate those. We're going to start with some of those questions. So now is a great moment, if you have a burning Hanukkah cooking question, to put that into the chat, and we will get to as many as we can over the course of the afternoon. I like the cat. And we'll start with a few that came in advance. And I'm gonna actually start us off with a question that I had. In this COVID Hanukkah, and in this sort of different year where we aren't able to all get together and have a big latke party, sort of what's exciting each of you, and what feels new and different and wonderful about this Hanukkah from a cooking and just like celebration perspective. So I'll throw that over to Liz and Jeffrey.
Want to get us started, Jeffrey? With that amazing background you have? I'm jealous of it.
Thank you, Liz. I've surprised you and everyone here. Everyone, thank you for coming. This is so fun. And, I feel like Liz and I we've been cooking and doing these virtual demos, and it's actually so nice to get to just talk and chat and kibitz, and hopefully hear from some of you as well. So I'm excited about that. And Liz, I got a few photos I'm going to surprise you with as well, so you can get a sense of where my head's been at the past few days. What am I thinking about this year? I shared something on social media a couple days ago. I was just there's something so nice about not having the burden of making giant, latke fries, and smelling latkes for days, just doing something in small batches. And I make my latkes by hand. And so, sometimes my forearm hurts, my wrist hurts. And so I'm really appreciative of small quantities. That said, I made small batches of latkes 2 nights ago and last night. And I'm out of latkes. I finished latkes each night, and I'm out of leftovers. And that, I actually, one of the things I liked about kind of early quarantine days was I was cooking normal recipes, so I had leftovers for days, and now I've adjusted to the smaller batches, and so things are out of whack, and I'm used to having latke leftovers for a few days. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at right now, and ultimately I'm just missing people. I'm wanting connection. I want to have people over. I want to go places. I want to do things, and so I think Hanukkah is sort of bringing that out for me right now. Liz, what about you?
Yeah, so I was telling Jeffrey last night that Hanukkah is, if not my favorite holiday of the year, definitely top 3. And I think that might seem a little surprising. I don't know if it's anybody else's favorite holiday, but the thing I love about it is that you really get this long stretch of 8 nights, and yet it's very casual, right? So you're not really, there's no synagogue obligations. There may or may not even be family obligations depending on your family, right? I mean, I feel like this is the most low stakes holiday, at least in my experience, of not just myself, but of many other folks. We you get together with your fam, have a little latke maybe. And I kind of like that, because I feel like I really own my Hanukkah experience completely. It's not overtaken by any formalities or conventions. It's all I have to do is light the candles, and I feel like it's Hanukkah. But of course I make tons of latkes too. So I think this year, Well, it's a very strange year. I think I'm really just approaching it the same way I always would, which is how can I really be in the Hanukkah spirit and define what that means for myself in a casual way over the next few days. So we'll be teaching, this is our third event of the Hanukkah holiday so far. There's lots more. But in the in-between times, I'm kind of like looking at this giant stack of potatoes that's on my counter and thinking, hey, Hanukkah, how you doing? You know? And
Or this
just
giant
having
stack of
fun with
potatoes,
that.
Liz,
I
behind me.
love it. I love it. I'm so jealous. I got to get a new computer so I can do the
And
virtual
for anyone
backgrounds.
who can see my background, you can see this is when Liz and I, we actually created, we did like a photo shoot, just being, silly. And this was our building our version of a Hanukkah gingerbread house using the potato pancake boxes you buy in the stores and filling them with actual real ingredients instead of the processed ones. So having a little fun here. And I want to also just appreciate Beth and Marcia. I love your backgrounds. Marcia, it looks like that's a corned beef sandwich. I'm not sure where from. Fill in the details.
Illinois.
Oh, Skokie, Illinois. Okay, there you go. And Beth, I just appreciate the Hanukkah spirit. So virtual backgrounds are welcome. So I just want to appreciate that.
Yes. It's funny. I thought when I saw this diorama, whatever, it reminded me of, yes, when you have the, oh, wait, Deborah, can you stop that? I'm not sure how you did that even.
I got it. I got
Great.
it.
Thank you. That's a new one. So it reminded me of when you have, like in the supermarket, when they have like the big chips display for the Super Bowl, but as a Hanukkah option, I'm very into it. So you mentioned the idea of your, the inevitable latke smell sort of becoming pervasive in the house when making latkes. And I'm wondering, this was a question that came in from one of the folks in advance, but sort of how do you prevent your apartment from smelling like latkes for days? And sort of a similar with that, when you are doing that frying, what kind of oil are you using and what kind of pan are you using? And those came from Margot.
Liz, why don't you get us started with this one?
Yeah.
I've got some thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, these are all really good questions. So there were several questions in there. So number one, we are talking about that smell. And I have a few strategies. Number one is, I know it's cold, but I always crack a window or two. I think it's important. And I think that, you will be grateful, even if you're a little bit chilly, to have a little bit of airflow in your home. So that's pretty basic information, but I think it's important. And I think even if you're cold, you should do it. But more than that, what I have adopted is a strategy in which I close all the doors of my house that I don't want the latke smell to get into, that I possibly can. So bedroom door is closed, office door is closed, so that the kitchen smell doesn't quite creep in. And I have my like latke clothes, and I don't bring the latke clothes into my bedroom. I don't bring them into, any other room. And they're upstairs, kind of like in a pile folded near the door of my room. So right before I do the laundry, I'll put them in. But my key thing is not so much that you can really prevent the latke smell, because you know what, you want a little latke smell. It's just that you want the latke smell in the kitchen and not everywhere else. So I'm just going to start with that question. I know there was a question about oil. I don't remember the third part, but I'll pass it to Jeffrey for some of his thoughts, and then maybe he can talk about, the pan, the oil in the pan.
Okay, so I wanted to say about the smell. Bad news, everyone. I bought a high-end fancy air purifier. There was the Wirecutter's top recommendation 2 weeks before Hanukkah. I made latkes the past 2 days. I had it running at full blast. I have a relatively small kitchen. I live in a one-bedroom apartment. It is impossible. There is no way to avoid it. Windows open, everything. You are gonna get latke smell. You need to lean into it. You need to embrace it. You are gonna smell like latkes. You just need to shower maybe more frequently than you are during the pandemic. This is there's a lot of hygiene leeway these days. But
washing your hair is key, exactly, by the way.
It's in your hair, like that's where it is. Own it. It's gonna smell, and like Liz said, like just, you know what? It's better than, I can tell you, having been in a kitchen, many kitchens making gefilte fish, it is a preferable smell to the gefilte fish smell. So let's celebrate what Hanukkah has to offer. In terms of oil, okay, so Lots to say on this topic. Really want to use this oil, high smoke point. I've been frying the past couple of days with the peanut oil, which is a great frying oil. Some of the oils that, French fries are typically made in, usually it's like a less so peanut now because of peanut allergies, but you're also seeing a lot of corn oil or sunflower oil used. Vegetable oil and canola oil work fine as well. I don't like them as much for deep frying. But if you want to kick it old school, if you want to be a traditionalist about it, I would highly recommend, if you are someone who does eat meat or animal products, using a rendered poultry fat, specifically goose fat. And actually, Marcia is on the call, who has fried things in goose fat with me in Poland, and can speak to that. But it is a high smoke point, high flavor, and it's also very old world. So if you want to kind of connect to, if you have family from Eastern Europe or Central Europe, connect to those roots when frying latkes, definitely go with the goose schmaltz. As for pan, Liz, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can both agree, Jeffrey, that a cast iron pan is an ideal pan for frying. It holds that heat so well, and so we love a cast iron. I think a nice nonstick pan is also great. I've got a nice set of nonsticks that I've been using the last couple of nights, so I would say anything like that is great. But I'd say that the key thing is also the tool that you're flipping over the latkes with. So Jeffrey and I did a demonstration last night, and he was able to flip his latkes with tongs, with metal tongs, and metal tongs just don't get enough love. So I really encourage you to give it a shot with the metal tongs. It actually gives you more control than the spatula. But when I am using a spatula, I use wood because I don't want to scrape the bottom of my pan with my metal tongs, no matter whether it's cast iron or a nonstick pan. So I love wood, I love tongs, and I love a cast iron pan or a nonstick pan. And I'd be curious, I did see somebody say something about using a instant pot.
I think that was for the brisket, though.
Okay, I missed that. That's what I was wondering. Okay, I was like, if there's latkes in an instant pot, I need to understand that because my brain would explode.
Yeah, you fry them in 20 seconds, Liz. It's amazing.
It sounds incredible. You could definitely make applesauce in an instant pot in about 4 minutes, so that'd be cool.
But by the time it takes to pressurize an instant pot, you would likely have cooked your apples enough. So I don't think that is probably the best use.
Just saying, we've got devotees out there. I'm not going to throw any shade to the instant pot.
I want to say one thing that was huge for me in understanding and learning and upping my latke game, which is just like not using enough oil and using enough of the fat, because I was always like scared. In my family, we were very classic 80s 90s fat phobic. I mean, how many of you had margarine instead of butter in your home? Like, I see a hand, I see a few nods. Some of you don't have your cameras on, so I can't see your recognition of this fact. But there is that fat phobia persisted, and like just the idea of not using too much oil. But what ended up happening for my family is we actually used a griddle. We were constantly adding oil, and we ended up having really greasy latkes as a result of it. And I didn't know any better, but what we were doing was we were just because we weren't using enough oil and it wasn't cooking properly, we had to keep adding more, and then we were adding more oil to the final product. Whereas if you have a hot enough oil and you throw in your latkes and you don't disturb them and you let them fully fry one side and then you flip them, you are going to have a better cooked latke that won't be as greasy and will just be crispier and crunchier. Okay, so that is just a huge piece of the fry game as well that I think is just is critical. And basically for me, I don't even know. Like I usually say, it should like go depending on the size of your latke. The middle of your latke, like half of your latke, should be submerged in oil, and usually it's more oil than you think you need. But the other thing is, you don't have to throw away your oil if you haven't done too much frying in it. It can go a long way. So I love to also make donuts and throw them in the same oil after. And so there's a lot of room to play, but use enough oil.
Yeah, and I just want to throw out there that we are not the only latke frying experts on this Zoom, I am sure. So if what we're saying confirms or denies your experiences, please let us know in the chat, because we're all about that crowdsourced information. So we love having plenty of oil, so it goes up halfway to the latke. Do you do something different? Do you deep fry your latkes? Do you love to do it on the griddle because you find that it holds together? We're interested in your experiences as well, because we get around, and getting a lot more input from other folks, it's helpful. We want to know from you, our fellow latke makers. We are sure you are all out there.
Yeah, Liz, I want to actually just point out, Marcia just changed the background to this looks like beet latkes, Marcia. I could say you
Root
could probably use a little bit more
vegetables.
oil in there,
Yeah, I agree.
Those were your lackeys in Warsaw.
Oh my, I could have used more
Oh,
oil in there. Oh my
Jeffrey.
gosh,
Shade,
Marcia.
shade.
Way to call
Called
me
you
on it.
out, man. Yeah.
We did have a limited amount of goose fat, but
True. It doesn't take
so-
much.
Right. So to back up a little bit, so before we get to the frying, we must source our vegetable or starch of choice, and sort of as an ingredient question. So there were a few questions about, and I think one of these I know Jeffrey will have a strong opinion on, but the idea of making latkes sans food processor.
Mhm.
And then also sort of like in terms of like latke ingredients, do you include, how do we get those onions in there? Can you go, I would argue you can't go without onions. Like that's just a personal, firmly held belief that onions are an essential both texture and flavor agent to the party. But for whatever reason, if somebody can't have onions, so talk to me about the ingredient level. And also, Shelley, I am loving this suggestion of natural based cooking smell reduction.
I just want to start off about the ingredients, and then maybe we can talk about hand grating versus the food processor. I have been forwarded no fewer than 5 times so far this week the Joan Nathan recipe that was in the New York Times for the perfect latke, the ultimate hack. Jeffrey, I'm not sure if you got that email like 20 times.
Yeah, I saw it and have gotten the email, and
Yeah.
yes. And Liz, it's probably worth noting that you worked with Joan, many moons ago.
I did. And I know how she comes up with these ideas. It's like she has this experience, and then all of a sudden it becomes the New York Times all the rage. And it's been a funny year of, I think because we're all cooking so much, I'm finding that the New York Times recipes go kind of viral. So I'm extremely interested to hear how many of you and how many folks end up making the recipe that Joan Nathan put in the New York Times and using her technique, which includes no onions. Okay. So there's no onion in that latke. It is potatoes, salt and pepper. It's an interesting technique. And I got a couple questions. What do you think of this? With the link, I need to know what you think of this, Liz. And frankly, all I said was, I got to try it. I mean, I'm not gonna say no to the pure potato pancake without trying it. But certainly, in my experience, onions are a critical link, and our root vegetable latkes have both onions actually and scallions. So we're double onioning in our latke recipe that Jeffrey and I use most regularly. So I leave it to you, and please do get in touch if you try the Joan Nathan technique this year without the onions. I'm wondering if all the supermarkets who anticipated a shortage on onions might be instead having a shortage on potatoes this year, like they were running out of buttermilk around Thanksgiving because of the buttermilk brined turkey recipe. So fascinating, and I'm interested.
Liz, there's 2 things about the Joan Nathan recipe. One is it's interesting because there's a style of making vegan latkes that required pre-baking pre-baking potatoes and then grating those, and you actually don't need egg as a binding agent for that. And so it's interesting to see that recipe sort of using taking it to a Swiss technique. But secondly, I would say the line between a latke and a hash brown, it's a really important distinction. Okay, so if you meet people who eat latkes with ketchup, I think they're in the it's a hash brown camp, and I don't know like how many. I was on a call. We were on a call last night. People ate latkes with Tabasco sauce, ketchup, and all that. I don't claim to be a purist in any way. For me, a latke is about like the applesauce, sour cream, condiments, and there's something about the latkes with onions that goes so beautifully with the applesauce and sour cream, and the flavors all go together, and it makes it feel different than a hash brown. If I'm just eating potatoes that are just fried and crisped up, like a hash brown, it doesn't feel like Hanukkah to me. So maybe that's just about the Jewish DNA of it all. But I feel like it's important to make that distinction. But again, no shade. If anyone does do ketchup, I'm actually curious. And Rebecca asked, what about using pre-shredded potatoes as a latke making hack, especially for people without a food processor? Liz, you're being a purist snob here. I think it's
pre-shredded potatoes. Listen, it's not that hard, that I'm not a purist, but that's one thing. I love a food processor. I think I'm not a purist like that. I just feel like pre-shredded potatoes.
Listen, there's a frozen latke from Trader Joe's that everyone talks about all the time.
They love
I hear it's great. I've never had it. You know what? If that's what it takes to get latkes in the house, fantastic. Like the box of latkes that we make fun of all the time, like they have a place. I've been in positions and places where I've needed to use them. Actually, that latke mix actually works really well if you are. And a few years ago, we played around with a food printer, and like the potatoes that are freeze dried, actually, you can create potato chips and latkes using a computer to print out latkes. And so you can't do that with pre-shredded or freshly shredded latkes. If some of you are interested in doing that.
True.
So I think that was something that was interesting. But everything has its place. Of course, if you can make it by hand, it's going to be and with fresh ingredients. That's the ideal scenario. And we can't always do it. And so we have to make our sacrifices where we need to make them.
Fair. So I'm going to put in this one last latke-based question, and then I think we'll move into other Hanukkah food realms. So this is a question about a Yukon Gold and russet combo technique with the Yukon Golds, which are like a firmer potato being boiled, and then the russets, which are a flakier, mealier potato being shredded. And clearly I watch too much Food Network too.
That sounds wonderful to me. That I've never tried it. I truly think that sounds great. I love a Yukon Gold in general. I say that's great. And I think that it's really about balance with a good latke. So I think that it's clear that Andrew Zimmern is saying, don't just use all Yukon Golds. They are not appropriate. It's not going to work. It's not going to fry well. It's not going to crisp up the way you want it to. You're not going to get that exact texture you want, but when you combo it up, it's great. So in our latke recipe that we have in our cookbook, we use russet potatoes, but we also use parsnip and turnip. And so I'm not saying that you should make parsnip and turnip latkes, which historically have been made throughout centuries of Eastern European Jewry. But I actually think the combo of those three is the perfect balance. It's a little bit lighter than a pure potato latke. It offers just a little bit more of a complex flavor profile, while not being, a radically different latke, right? So I love the idea of what Andrew Zimmern is saying in that recipe.
Yeah, I grew up eating Yukon Gold latkes. You can fry anything. You just want to sort of reduce the amount of liquid in your batter, essentially. So if you're squeezing out your latkes to get that extra liquid out, and you're adding enough flour or other starchy bits of potato starch to make up for the lack of that in the Yukon Gold, it'll work. We fry parsnip latkes all the time. Beets and carrots make their way in. So there's a lot of culinary orthodoxy when it comes to Jewish cooking. It's like, oh, it has to be a russet potato, it has to be onion in this. Everyone makes it different. That's the diversity. That's what's exciting. If there's ever a year for experimentation, no one's coming over. This is the year. Experiment. Try something absurd. What should go in the latke? What have you thought about that you haven't put in yet? Who was it? Janet, you made the brisket. Have you ever put the brisket in the latkes to fry the latkes? I'm curious. I want to know. So I would just say, this is the time for experimentation, and really, most things can fry well. One of the famous trends of latke making the past few years has been celeriac latkes. and you know, I actually don't love those that much, but some people do, and they fry up, you know, they fry it well, maybe not as well as a russet, but it's still delicious if you know how to fry well. If you use enough oil and you know, do all the other tricks, you should have a lot of success.
Awesome. So with that, I'm going to move us out of the realm of the potato and into other foods. So I would love, first of all, just to think about the meal beyond the latke, right? So like latkes are delicious, and I'm going to put brisket in its own category. I think most of us who grew up in sort of an Ashkenazi kind of a background have a familiarity with a brisket latke being a good winter stick to your bones kind of a food. But if we're looking for something else that is a Hanukkah meal builder beyond the latkes.
So
Liz.
yeah, I mean, we have a lot to say about that. It's worth noting that historically, as Jeffrey has just brought to our attention, historically, Ashkenazi Jews in Central and Eastern Europe, particularly kind of in the Alsace region, the sort of original region of Ashkenaz, what's called Ashkenaz, there was a Hanukkah goose. A Hanukkah goose rounded out the feast of Hanukkah, particularly on Shabbat. So that would be tonight. That would be this night you would be serving a goose. And it's really important to note that goose was the primary poultry of Ashkenazi Jews for centuries. It was not chickens like we see now in the United States. It was geese. And there's so many reasons for that. Number one, that geese have tons more fat. They're much fattier. And so if you needed fat, you can't go to the grocery store and pick up your, avocado oil. You need cooking fat. And so a fatty bird like a goose provided that. And so you would actually, if you had geese, if you were keeping geese, you would raise them and kind of fatten them up in anticipation of this very season of Hanukkah. And that is when you would slaughter your geese, render the fat, use the feathers for your pillows and your mattresses for the winter, your blankets. You would stuff the neck. You would do so many different things with every single part of that goose. But certainly that roasted goose was going to be the centerpiece of your Hanukkah table. And so we, I could talk forever about how I think a Hanukkah goose rounds out the feast of Hanukkah, and you could fry your latkes in that goose schmaltz, which is a wonderful schmaltz. We can talk more about it. But I think at the very base, it's important to keep in mind that you need to round out a meal. So starch alone, fried in fat, is not going to be a meal. So like any other meal for Hanukkah, it makes sense to have a protein, to have another vegetable. So I'll pass it on to Jeffrey because I know he has lots to say on this topic. And I think we'd also love to crowdsource what else is on your Hanukkah table. And I don't want you to feel like it has to be Jewish per se, right? It doesn't have to be brisket. It doesn't have to be a roasted chicken. It can be something that is outside of the scope of what you would normally eat for a Jewish feast, right? So.
Yeah, I just want to say the past couple of nights I was making latkes. I just didn't have it in me to like make a salad and to make, I don't know, some kind of main dish. And I just ate latkes and I had a major stomach ache. And it brought me back to some of those feelings I had at other holiday parties where I just ate donuts and latkes and gelt. And this doesn't make any sense as a holiday. This is ridiculous, So, and it sort of bothered me for a while until I realized, I can just make latkes a side dish. Like, you can have a proper meal. And it seems like a silly revelation, but it actually, it reminded me of thinking a lot about different Jewish holidays and thinking about what it means to feast and what it means to celebrate with food. And part of what that means is you have, part of what that means is you actually have to plan for people coming over, and you have to plan, like Liz said, all these different parts of it. So I just want to, somehow we've reduced Hanukkah to these basic food groups, but actually it's much more complex than that. This is the time of year. This is the, we're post-harvest in Eastern Central Europe or the Northeast. You're starting to dig into your root vegetables, the foods that you've been storing up. This is one of my favorite, classic Yiddish writers, Sholem Aleichem. One of my favorite stories of his is called Goose. It's about a woman who around the high holidays she bought 30 geese and starts fattening them up in a shtetl in Eastern Europe. And it's right around Hanukkah when you would slaughter your goose, and you'd be in this, ready to both store your schmaltz for the season into the winter. But it's also when your sauerkraut that you started fermenting will be ready. It's when so you'd have these fermented foods that actually help digest all of this heaviness. And so there's thinking about that rhythm and that cycle. This is when you have your your potatoes stored very nicely, either in the ground or in your root cellar. So I like to think about all those root vegetables and even apples, which one of my first job in New York was selling apples at the farmer's market. And apples were available throughout the winter because they stored so nicely, even though they were only available in the fall. So this is that time to kind of begin celebrating our storage foods. And so the Hanukkah goose kind of begins that process. And I should say, Passover prep begins at Hanukkah for some people because they would actually store some of that schmaltz that they rendered back in the old days. They'd store that for Passover, and some people would even store in the fat, preserved in the fat, would be the liver of the goose to have a special treat on Passover. So I just love how thinking about one holiday starts at another.
That's great. So then thinking about, so I know that we tend to get very into fried foods as a Hanukkah tradition. I'm curious on, so for me, I also like to appreciate this time of year as an opportunity for all of the cheeses because of the story of Judith, and she gets Holofernes drunk on cheese and wine, and then slaughters him and goes on and helps toward the Maccabees' victory in that version of the story. And so I know that one of the recipes that you shared with us had some goat cheese vibes about it. And I would love to hear sort of your cheesy Hanukkah food options as well.
Well, it's worth noting, Rebecca, that the original latkes, hate to bring it back to the latkes, but we got to do it. The original latkes were actually, or latkes as we know them, right, were actually in Italy, and they were cheese fritters fried in olive oil. In the olive oil, this season actually lines up with the very first olive harvest in certain climates, and so you're just starting to get that olio nuovo, that fresh green olive oil, and so in a climate like in various regions of Italy where olive oil was the predominant fat, and certainly this time of year in particular, frying cheese fritters in olive oil, it just made sense for Hanukkah, which is so different than what we, I think about for Hanukkah. And it's funny, I always think about Hanukkah in a place like South Africa that is in the opposite seasons right now, and how funny it must be to be eating potato latkes in the Lithuanian predominantly Lithuanian Jewish community in South Africa in the middle of the summer. And so I almost want to call all my South African friends and say, you can make cheese fritters instead, in olive oil, right? Because that just feels more seasonally appropriate. So I want to offer up that I think a little cheese pancake would be a fun thing to try. I also just want to shout out that right before we started, I brought out one of my favorite snacks, which is cheese balls. Thought that would be really fun to eat as a snack in honor of Judith, for sure. And I think that the other piece of it is that when you are making latkes for a crowd, often it takes a little while to get those latkes going, right? Maybe you're making them, and putting on a nice cheese platter is a great way to feed people when we can feed people again, but maybe feed yourself too. So those are some thoughts on dairy.
So just to take us off dairy for 1 second, I'm having first of all, loving what people are adding and tips that they're adding in here. Rochelle just chatted me that she does something, not to, again, we're back on latkes, but Rochelle puts the latke, shredded latkes into the microwave for 2 minutes after they're shredded to reduce moisture and cook them a little bit, and said it's a really great tip. I've never done that, but I was really interested in that as an approach. So thank you for sharing that. And I quickly on this cheese thing, so one of my goals this Hanukkah is just to get out of this focus on just like how did latkes become the only thing we're talking about? So I love that we were talking about schnitzel earlier and thinking about what a great main is. Like schnitzelify things, like that's like you're frying, it's celebrating. You're you can make special breadcrumbs from from your challah from Shabbat tonight, and you can make challah breadcrumbs and then make a schnitzel. You can schnitzelify anything, but then I want to say that in cheese, one of the things I made a couple nights ago is I just started making fried cheese as well. So listen, I got the oil, I'm humming along. I want to play. So I do appreciate that. And also, like Liz said, different parts of the world, right? It wasn't always about these heavy foods because I actually studied in South Africa when I was in college, and I did a Hanukkah in South Africa, and it actually made sense and it worked for sure. But something about that Mediterranean climate and thinking about the history of those cheese fritters definitely makes me think about the cycle and the seasons. In northern climates, it's not until around Shavuot time when animals are being weaned off their mother's milk, and dairy is abundant. In warmer climates, milk is much more abundant and much more easily accessible for using at this time of year. So it also just kind of makes sense. So if you live in California, you might actually have more local dairy available right now than you would have in the Northeast as well. So I always appreciate that connection to it. And actually, for a long time, up until I think the 13th century, Hanukkah was associated with dairy more than it was associated with fried foods.
I think you just also answered one of my quintessential Shavuot questions. So thank you for accidentally answering a Shavuot "why do we eat dairy" question on that, Jeffrey. So just answers for all seasons. I wanted to just as folks are sharing so many great comments, I would love if anybody has other questions to throw those into the chat about your Hanukkah cooking questions or your Hanukkah cooking triumphs or ideas. Are you making a solo Hanukkah this year? Are you doing like a mini, just for 2 or 3 Hanukkah celebration this year? Did you outsource your Hanukkah food? Like I said at the beginning, I last night did my annual trip to get fried chicken and gulab jamun, which are an Indian sweet that are fried little like dough balls that are then like soaked in syrup. And they also have jalebi there. And those have become in my neighborhood where I live, there's a very large South Asian community. And so I am always delighted to borrow from other traditions of fried foods. There's also a Dunkin' Donuts, but it's a little less exciting.
Also, any favorite Hanukkah books? I have a few latke books on my shelf, and I appreciate this time of year when that intersection of Hanukkah and Christmas, to some degree. So also wanted to ask, this is Meet the Latkes by Alan Silverberg, and this is the Lemony Snicket, the Latke who couldn't stop screaming. And so these are fun ones on my shelf.
So Kenzie has a question regarding sufganiyot and so donut making tips.
Yeah, Kenzie, if you have any specifics, let us know. I'll just actually give you one of my favorite little tricks. Is I make sufganiyot out of challah dough. So if you're making challah tonight, maybe some of you have dough that is in process. Right before after your first rise, after you proof your dough, the first time, basically you punch it down, and then you could start grating it and then let it proof again. Or what you could do is you could actually roll it out and use a glass or a biscuit cutter and shape it, let it proof for about 20-30 minutes, and then deep fry it, pop it in the oil, and it actually makes a fantastic. There's usually a little bit of sweetness in your challah dough. There's richness and body to it. It makes a fantastic sufganiyah. And then I will inject it with some kind of jam or jelly. So I would just say that that's something that is a really fun thing to do if you're already making challah, and you can similarly make babka from that same challah dough. And in terms of frying, it's just actually really easy. I don't know, for some reason, I always thought sufganiyot, making donuts, was really difficult, and it's just about getting your oil at a good temperature, at the right temperature, and sometimes it depends on what the dough is, but just get your oil nice and hot. You don't even need a thermometer. Get it nice and hot, throw them in there, and just You'll do a couple of tests to make sure you're going to get them nicely cooked through to get a sense of what that time looks like. And they're really good when they're like fresh out of the oil. And I like to put some powdered sugar on mine as well. And so that's a fun way to play. Liz, any other thoughts on sufganiyot?
You know, it's a nice bridge, actually. So one of the questions that we got through this was, what are some other Hanukkah dishes around the world, and what are some of the other Hanukkah dishes outside of the Ashkenazi tradition? And specifically, we got a question about the Egyptian tradition. And so I knew a little bit about this, and there's a lot of fried donut traditions. We call them donuts, but they're fried dough, right? There's fried dough traditions all around the world. And so, for example, one of the dishes that you would find throughout the Middle East on Hanukkah, it's not technically sufganiyot because of the rising time and the exact kind of way the yeast is, how much yeast there is. I was trying to understand exactly how we define sufganiyot, and it's loose, but it seems to be a long rise time. But there's a long tradition of these fried doughs. And so, for example, in the Egyptian tradition, it's called zalabia. And so you'd fry dough, and then you would drizzle a syrup with rose water or orange essence and sugar syrup, and you would sort of soak these fried dough pieces in a syrup like that. And different regions in the Middle East would have a little bit of a different play on the way that you would soak it, or what the exact ratio of the dough to the yeast to the syrup might be. There's also an Iraqi tradition, a sort of funnel cake looking fried dough that gets drizzled with a syrup. And so in terms of sufganiyot, I guess my thought would be maybe think beyond the jelly donut, right? Think beyond the stuffed donut, and think maybe what would it look like to fry dough and actually soak it in a syrup. And I think that's a lot of fun, and it kind of gets you into the world of global Jewry. And frankly, it's a little bit easier in a way. Sufganiyot are not always, obviously the challah hack is amazing and I love that, but you know, I think making a sugar syrup and coating it and using all those other essences and flavors is a real way to explore the donut conversation. And one other thing I'll say is that I was at the chiropractor a couple of days ago, and my chiropractor loves cooking Jewish food, and he comes in and he goes, Liz, I just saw this video where this person was making donut holes and injecting them. I got to get one of these injectors. And so I also think my other tip is like, buy yourself a fun injector on Amazon or whatever, and just like play because the sky's the limit. It doesn't have to, it could be filled with anything. And it, you know, like Jeffrey was saying, it's so much fun to just kind of make it a little science experiment-y.
I just put it in. I just put in the chat.
Rebecca, you're muted again.
Rebecca, you're
Yep,
muted.
I got it.
Okay.
I got it. It kept muting and unmuting me at the same time. We have a recipe on our site that I just put in the chat for making zulbia, which are the same thing as jalebi, what Liz is talking about, where it's this sort of funnel cakey type of a recipe that then gets soaked in syrup. There's actually a video version of it on the site.
Cool.
And it's in the Hanukkah cookbook that you'll also find recipes from Liz and Jeffrey. So we will, that'll be shared out to everybody. And I love this different donut for each Hanukkah night. That's, you know, sounds like a dangerous article, but a delicious one. And bimuelos.
And Rebecca, I just want to point out, so Marcia, thanks for changing your background again. Lovely image. And I will say the applesauce in this image is made using, sort of a tart baking apple, but also there's a smoked dried plum or smoked prune, essentially, that is very common in Eastern Europe, very common in Poland, very associated actually with Jews who, you know, used to smoke their fruit because they often didn't own the orchards but would rent them out. And now it's a national dish. But if you, one of the fun things to do is you can actually make your applesauce a vehicle for different flavors, and you can explore and experiment and play that way. And so it's something that I've been doing more of lately and trying to kind of bring out those flavors. But that smoked prune applesauce, Marcia, that was really delicious. Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to put in a last call for questions. If you want to put it in the chat, if you want to message one of us on our own, we can ask it on your behalf, or any other tips for Hanukkah feasting before we close out in a few minutes.
Or just questions also just around like, you know, like Hanukkah in general, I mean, or like what we're all doing. I mean, it's, you know, I kind of feel like, you know, Hanukkah is an excuse for us to gather, but it's nice to all be gathered.
Exactly.
Yeah, I wanted to shout out a couple things while we're waiting for any final questions or thoughts. One thing I love about a latke is that it works really well gluten-free. So I just wanted to shout that out. Jeffrey last night was making gluten-free latkes. His partner is gluten-free. That gluten-free flour or the gluten-free breadcrumbs that you mix into the mix is a really good sub. So just wanted to shout that out, that I think sometimes people don't quite realize how flexible the latke is. And so just putting it out there that it can be vegan, it can be gluten-free. And that, I think that's what makes it, partially what makes it so popular is all that flexibility, right? So you can mix what's in it completely. You can mix what you put on top of it, right? So just shouting out the latke love for the gluten-free and vegan options that it provides. Yeah, and I also wanted to ask if anybody, one of the other questions that I thought we would potentially crowdsource was, does anybody incorporate anything else interesting in their applesauce or their pear sauce, right? So Jeffrey just shouted out some smoked fruit, which sounds incredible. But I'd love to have some ideas, because for me, I'm feeling a little bored by my apple pear sauce, even though I think it's delicious. I'm ready for some new ideas. So I welcome those from anybody out here.
Shelly just shared about Italian plums, which
ooh. That sounds amazing, Shelly. That sounds so brilliant. Cranberries and applesauce, fabulous. See, this is what I needed, everybody. This is what I need.
Thanks, Civica. That was a beautiful moment when cranberry applesauce, I felt like, you know, was in the spotlight.
Peak cranberry applesauce year.
That was a good year. It was a good year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also you had it almost bridged that, you know, Hanukkah goose divide. Like we had the turkey with the latkes, you know, it made sense.
That's true. It really did make sense. You finally got that rounded out meal that we all are craving, right?
Yeah. And Barbara, shout out to the food mill. I'm a lover of the food mill. I don't like to peel my apples. I don't want to have to get rid of the seeds. I just want to throw them in there and deal with it later. And the food mill just takes care of it all. So if you have one, yeah, we called it the Foley grinder in my house growing up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right.
I think, yeah. Wow. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to let Liz and Jeffrey close us out before we get into any final words. So yeah, thank you.
So we just wanted to say thank you all for joining this Hanukkah hotline. It's a wacky, fun idea, but we kind of felt like this is what Hanukkah is. We're all talking about food anyway, so let's talk some more. Maybe Jeffrey, we can put the at Gefilteria in the chat. We're on all the social channels, so feel free to join us for this Hanukkah journey. The next few days, we'll be posting and sharing things on Instagram, on Facebook, and we also have a website that always lists our events. And we just, you know, we love to stay in touch with folks. And I just got a wonderful email, Jeffrey. I don't know if you saw it, from a woman who said, you know, I'm Sephardic, but I've been totally astounded with Ashkenazi cuisine ever since I cooked through your cookbook. And then we started talking about, well, what do you do on Hanukkah? And, and I was like having the most fun time ever. So we love to hear from folks who want to dialogue and share. It really is a lot of fun for us, and it's how we get so much inspiration. So thank you. And we also just wanted to show some love to Haggadot.com and Rebecca Missel. It really is filling such a special gap, what you all are doing at Haggadot.com, to kind of empower folks to get crafty, to do it yourself in a way that kind of isn't reliant on tradition, but reverential to tradition, right? So that balance really strikes with us. And so certainly folks, throw a few bucks their way. You know, we all need help this year. So I think Rebecca threw the link in the chat for that.
Yes, and everybody will be getting all of that also as a follow-up.
Yeah.
Any final words, Jeffrey? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone. Honestly, you know, those of you who are sharing your screens or just being here with us and just it's really nice. I zoomed with some family yesterday and lit candles, but it really does feel nice to be able to connect virtually, and I'm just so glad, honestly, to feel in community with all of you. I mean, Hanukkah, that's what it's about. That's what the holidays are about, and that's what food is about, honestly, and even divorced from the Jewish context. And so to be able to talk about food in this abstract way, but to do that and celebrate together, it's just, it means a lot. So it's so nice to see your faces and nice to see your commentary, and I wish everyone a happy Hanukkah. And hopefully, I love that next year in real life is becoming a thing, instead of, it's sort of the next evolution of next year in Jerusalem. So next year in real life, may we be cooking latkes together, may we be experimenting with all sorts of new ingredients and maybe playful cheese adaptations, and maybe we'll be cooking certain fried foods from around the world together. But I really love that. So thank you all. Thank you, Rebecca and Hagedorn, for having us.
Thank you. And thank you. I'm going to take off the spotlight so that we can all see each other. Hold on.
Oh, and Barbara made the recipe for homemade sour cream.
Amazing. And just, yes. And Marcia, just special thanks to you for your rapidly changing and wonderful backgrounds. They were a delight throughout this session, but also just a huge thank you to Liz and Jeffrey for sharing their love and passion for food with all of us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for joining. Again, we'll be sharing a copy of the recording and some fun clips from the site, including the cookbook featuring the Gefilteria's recipes. That'll probably come out on Monday. And we'll be following up with everyone. And we just wish you all a very happy Hanukkah and a Shabbat Shalom. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Thanks. Shabbat Shalom.
Happy Hanukkah.
Thanks,
Happy
everyone.
Hanukkah. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
This is so great.